just a short time ago, we saw Brad Lynch speak about his building outside, and so on your way out, for those who are not from the School of Architecture, please take a few minutes to take a look at the house. It's actually a beautiful project by Brad Lynch of Brindlestool and Lynch, who's teaching for us this semester. Today I'm very pleased to bring one half of Rogers Marvel, and Jonathan Marvel is joining us today to lecture. Rob Rogers and Jonathan Marvel founded Rogers Marvel Architects in 1992. Both partners have extensive backgrounds designing significant cultural projects around the world. Both bring a strong hand and an intense analytical approach to making architecture. Their team includes architects, graphic designers, industrial designers, landscape architects, preservationists, and digital specialists. The principals of RMA and staff work together to develop project-specific analysis techniques and building proposals. Their team's collective skills enable them to comprehensively develop sophisticated buildings and structures, long-term master plans, parks and open spaces, as well as furniture and projects. Well, that's what you could have learned about the firm if you looked at their website. This is the profile, and it's actually a very kind of appropriate description of the multiple scales at which the firm works. I remember teaching a studio in New York years ago, and Rogers Marvel had just finished their project for the Studio Museum in Harlem, which was 2001, the first phase of this. And this was a project for really one of the premier cultural institutions in Harlem, on 125th Street, the main cultural drag of Harlem. But it also had very limited resources, and they needed to do this project in phases. The second phase was done in 2006. And I was very, very impressed at the partie level with how a kind of interstitial space between the pre-existing museum and other buildings were used to build out the street wall, but also how that light kind of marked the museum and the institution. And also the way that light is brought down through the courtyard space down into the lower level of the museum on what is a very constrained and constricted site, giving the whole museum a greater sense of presence than it had before that. In visiting the office of Rogers Marvel, you're immediately struck by the kind of vivid engagement with new materials and new techniques for producing architecture, whether you're looking at a screen which has imagery printed on it or actually perforated for a high school in New York, or whether you're looking at a prototype of a wooden bicycle that's also in the office. There's a great range of work. In fact, the office has I don't know if you'd call it a subsidiary wing called Truck, that just designs smaller objects, tableware, and I'm impressed with the fact that on the poster you'll see that the firm was a recent winner of the Governor's Island competition, an international competition in partnership with West 8, Adrian Huza, as well as Diller and Scofidio, a kind of exciting project, and especially so when you think about the ability to work at the scale of a teacup or the scale of a landscape. And their talk, or Jonathan's talk tonight, is appropriately entitled Public Spaces, and I'd like you all to welcome Jonathan Marvel.
Thank you, Mark, and thanks, John Yoder, for the excellent tour of your architecture school. Rob and I teach. Unfortunately, Rob and I can't always be at the same place at the same time. We're incredibly busy. New York is still booming despite the oncoming recession, or maybe we're already in the middle of it, but we're booming. So I'm going to bring a little bit of New York to you. I'm going to talk very, very quickly because I want to run through a lot of projects and save some time for Q&A. And the, let's see, did I get up here? Wanted to start with just the very idea that the firm is interested in public space because we're New Yorkers. We live and work in Lower Manhattan, and this is the feeling that you get when you're down on Wall Street. It's sort of the epicenter of the financial district, and it's also what happens in Times Square and parts of Midtown. You get a high density of people and a high density of buildings and infrastructure. My first of sort of a series of projects, and we're really intent on building, but I'm starting out with a project that we really never intended to build, so it's really much of it's an experiment of sorts for us. This is for the I-beam competition, and we wanted to celebrate the design process in this effort here. And because public space is always about people, and people are either, like sharks, people are moving all the time. We're always moving. Even when we're sitting at our desk, we're moving. So circulation, whether it's in very small increments or big moves, is really the way we structure our work. And we wanted to really test an idea about how to move through a building much like a ski resort, where you can take lifts up and down, you can cross over, you can jump around from the different lodges, and there's always multiple ways up and multiple ways down. We thought that was a good analogy for I-beam, which was going to be growing into a building over a 10-year period, fully saturating their space over time with the intersection of production, education, and exhibition. And we wanted to filter those three programmatic elements throughout the building. We started the process by very rudimentary, this is like a first-year design studio, making very specific themed models from left to right. We had privately programmed spaces within the building. Then we had public spaces, so the cubes became more light-filled because we want to have natural light in all those areas. Then we looked at sort of interstitial areas that don't need a lot of engagement within the program, and we then looked at a kind of elevator and structural diagram just to say, okay, how can we create these floors where there is lots of structure with the Virendale trusses occupying the slabs, and then open floors where you don't have any structure at all. Then we put a zoning envelope around that. That on the far right is the New York City zoning code that is pertaining to this particular site. So that's why it's kind of got that cone of light and air up at the top, and fills out the site at the very bottom with some required setbacks in the front and rear yard. So when you combine all those digitally into the image on the right, you get this kind of collage effect of accident. And so our experiment was, okay, how can we then take kind of this accidental collage and collision of these very sort of necessary programmatic elements and start to mine that collage for a kind of an architecture. And for me, that kind of became the failing point in the experiment, because we started to fall back on those typical compositional moves, these sort of what I call bad habits. So in that mode of kind of composing the facade, we tried to hold off till the very last minute, tried to hold off on composition until we were forced practically into making a kind of composed building in order to then go into the presentation mode and render it and make animations of it. So, but along the way, one has thoughts and one has ideas. They're not necessarily compositional in nature. They're really about how you want people to move through the building. And that was really a kind of every project, and I think I wanted to bring this as a theme through the public spaces, is every project reaches a kind of a boiling point where you are involved in the process. You're engaging all the elements of program, structure, mechanical, circulation, site, conditions, environmental issues, material issues, and all of a sudden you reach a kind of a moment where it's all starting to come together, but it's coming together around a theme. And so these are, this is what we ended up, the building kind of looking like that composed collage in a way, with then kind of diving perspectively through sketches of how some of these spaces would feel like if you were to wander through the public spaces of the I-beam building, throughout the kind of cavernous 10 stories with a kind of vertical mall in the escalator that takes you upstairs. Having exhibition on display with your circulation elements, having laboratories floating in the middle of the libraries, and trying to juxtapose these different dualities within all of the varied spaces that we were creating, floating these public elements throughout the 10 stories. So that kind of boiling point, that kind of aha moment is, you know when you've hit it, you know when you've latched onto it, and that's where I think it becomes exciting for the architectural team, because we work in team. We've got about 55 people in the office right now. Everything is team oriented. It's a lot of discussion, it's a lot of backing and forthing, and we experiment with a lot of versions. We'll draw and build 100 models of any given thing to know if we've gotten it right. So we're testing every option. Just a little aside, this happens to be a tray, fruit tray, and a kind of a laminate section of a table with using a recycled aluminum, leather, and plywood in different varieties to sort of build up a laminate with sort of creature comfort on one side and industrial edges on the other. We have a small office out in Cody, Wyoming, so you're going to get a little bit of why we're so excited about public spaces. And Cody is all about the water. It was created by damming up the Shoshone River. Buffalo Bill did it at the turn of the century. So water is the theme that runs through Cody, and this is what it looked like before the reservoir, a little spit of nothingness, and even before Yellowstone became the park. It really boomed when they made Yellowstone National Park, and this is the eastern gate of Yellowstone Park. It's a sort of a town of 25,000 people. This is a leftover gravel mine. It's a 7-acre piece of land that's really landlocked from all streets. One of our clients donated it to the town of Cody, and we're turning it into a park. And we wanted the park to sort of thematically bring in water as the design feature. And so how do you design in a very arid kind of part of the world, how do you use water, which there is no water basically there? How do you use it to thematically drive the layout of the park? Well, we decided to sort of create different kinds of zones within the park itself. Here you can see it's under construction, almost finished right now. This sort of construction site. You can see how it's landlocked. So the topography of the site sort of created natural places for congregation as well as solitude, and we really worked hard to try to use all of the existing flora to create different biospheres, all revealing how much water it takes to operate each one of those biospheres. So you can see that this green lawn that runs through is a strip where the old canal used to be. We sort of said, okay, the green lawn is actually what takes is more water than any other plants that are indigenous there. So we sort of made that the emblem of the canal that used to run through that part of the town. The idea that greenery represents water, and you don't always get greenery. Sometimes these are plants that are brown year-round. So we said, okay, how much water does each species take? They all have different levels. So we created a kind of interpretive feature that you would find like lampposts throughout the site that would provide some lighting. They're solar operated, so they provide lighting. They also provide markers, but they also have this kind of container of water that tells you how much inches per year that particular species needs to survive on. And we are running this green trail through the town along the bike paths and through Main Street just for fun. Some of the truck, so I'm using a little truck moment to introduce each project. This happens to be a line of children's furniture where the children can make their own furniture, assemble it themselves out of flat pack, so it's easy to send it in the mail. You can also walk out of the store with your kit and take it home and assemble it. And that kind of assembly mode is how we're thinking about this 12-acre parcel of land that the city owns in Brooklyn. It's the Gowanus Canal site. It's a competition. We're one of the two finalists, and it's really here to discuss how one brings in 5,000 units of housing into this site and create as much park space at the same time. So that little red trapezoidal figure is down there at the mouth of the harbor as the Gowanus Canal creeps up towards the heart of Brooklyn. And what we did is we decided to run some streets back that were on the site once upon a time. It's now a concrete factory, and pull the streets back through, placing the buildings in different kinds of streets, wider streets, a mews, an elbow, so that you slow down traffic. And the architecture is one that, and this is a master plan. We're not really getting into any specific design, but the master plan is there to talk about how buildings go from masonry and erode to more glass as you move from the city side to the water side. We're also using the buildings as water collectors to maintain a reservoir of water for, it's like a water harvesting component, and there's also a swale that runs throughout the spine of the site, using the idea of the rivulet and erosion as a metaphor for how to watch the way people and also water move through from the private sides to the public sides of the site. So this is the most public part of the site, which is along the canal side. The more private parts are between buildings closer to the heart of the Carroll Gardens area. So lots of different kinds of park spaces. We're also teaming up with West Aid on this project. So we're creating lots of gardens of different sizes and scales for different age groups, and also trying to green the roofs and terraces, so that this idea that lower your carbon footprint, allow New York City to have as much open space and greenery. And here you can see how the buildings kind of start out at a 6-story base with a penthouses that go up to 16 stories in the middle and back to 12 along the Gowanus Canal. So it's about a lot of this idea of Brooklyn is largely a fabric of 4-story buildings, so we're trying to keep the scale down, but we have this requirement for the Housing Preservation Development Corporation. It's a largely affordable housing here with some market rate structures. So we're trying to keep the scale down with that base, and then that base erodes and cantilevers over the ground plane, creating as much, instead of one thinks of the ground plane as being closed, we want to open up the ground plane as much as possible. So we've got this 5 to 12 foot cantilever at that 2-story element. So letting the ground breathe as much as possible with a small footprint on the buildings. They're all using natural ventilation in the hallways, and here's the most city side where it's largely masonry. This is also senior housing, using the shutter as a kind of a way to create a scaled down version, because remember, across the street is a 3 and 4 story community, so of buildings we need to bring the scale down using scaled features like wood fenestration and shutters to make that effectively smaller and reading. This is the widest street, which has what we call the Swale Trail, a kind of interpretive water element that runs alongside the street in a 15-foot wide garden that has moments of water access points, so kids, as they walk up and down going to the park and going back home again, can kind of remind themselves about how important water is in our economic and political system. And now view back towards the canal from the underside of one of the buildings, just trying to engage the gardens and the buildings at the same time. The bud vase and candle, sort of symbolic of how you want to double up and maximize one thing can be both a bud vase and a candle holder at the same time. This is the only residential project I'm going to show you, but it really is trying to talk about how, despite being a private residence, we're trying to make it as public as possible. It's on the edge of the city along the Hudson River and Canal Street at that moment of intersection. So you can see we basically eroded the masonry cornice of the building that faced the Hudson River and created in its place a kind of big window wall that became a glass cornice, so that we maximize the views of the river from this 3-level apartment. It's a wonderful space that has these multi-tiered gardens that tie it all together. So this is the if you will, the 3rd floor with skylights going down into the private spaces of the house. So this terrace is creating this kind of garden with skylights emerging and canopies emerging. Again, trying to play as much inside-outside. These are the public spaces within the residence itself, if you will. The gardens become places to circulate through and around, and it's a very kind of a voyeuristic building, because when you're standing outside, you can look right inside that big window and check out what's going on. Eroding walls and floors to try to bring as much natural light from those upper terraces down into the private spaces of the house. You can see now the inside view of where those skylights land in the ceiling. You don't have to turn on any lights inside the house, so it's really operating on 100% daylight. And at nighttime, we're also illuminating through the skylights at the same time. Practically no paint at all, in using materials in their natural form, so that we kind of bring the garden inside the building as much as we can. Sort of celebrating that kind of industrial architecture and the simplicity of it all. The serving platter, having a kind of a iconic top on a tray is the symbol for the Battery Maritime building, which is a individual historic landmark at the tip of Manhattan. The Battery, it's the old ferry terminal that once upon a time served the New York Harbor. It was a sort of utopian dream to have this 7-bay ferry terminal. Not all of those 7 bays were built. In fact, the only 3 that are remaining are now part of this Battery Maritime building. None of the really glamorous historic features are left on the building, and all of the cool stuff was either never built, as in the case of that middle spire section, giving the utopian dream a strong symmetry. You can see that's the land side view, and the water side view is this huge scale porticos where the ferries would pull in. So what was built was slowly, sort of through neglect and misuse by the Department of Transportation, kind of became a derelict structure. The city put in about $60 million to restore the facade, and they did restoration efforts everywhere except for those areas that are in pink. And so those became the points within which we felt we could operate on. The rest of the building was really brought up to this perfect, Beaux-Art painted lady in a kind of San Francisco celebratory way fashion, which is the only building in New York that's like that at all. So what we said is, we need to add on 4 stories of hotel to make this building economically viable in the city. How do you do that? The original architecture had these 4 cupolas that were seen against the sky. These were taken off in the 40s, replaced by this tin shed, which is, like cutting the head off of a body. Meanwhile, the city's built up behind it. So what we proposed is that the glass addition becomes another version of the sky that used to be behind the cupolas. So this is where we are. We're presenting for the 2nd time to the Landmark Preservation Commission, which is the authority that will give us the green light to go ahead. They're seeing this next week. The first round, we didn't have the cupolas on there, and they flatly said, "Go home, come back again," with a more historically referenced project. So we pretended and this, leap of faith here, we pretended that the cupolas had been rebuilt by that other enterprise 5 years ago when they restored the envelope of the building. So we pretended that we had nothing to do with the historic cupolas, they were always there, and that would allow the argument for having this sort of new and old to complement each other as a foil, which I think is a very exciting dialogue. New York City we think of it as a modern city. It's actually a 19th century city, largely. I mean, you have pockets in Midtown and the financial district of these big, tall buildings, but largely it's a 19th century city. We're constantly engaged as architects to play new and old off of each other, and it's something that it becomes a kind of you feel like you're a lawyer delivering a Supreme Court case, because you have to build up this incredibly rich argument to allow the preservation committees to bless the project as you go ahead. So from the city side, it's this kind of modernistic floating box, and from the water side, the cupolas kind of ameliorate it and give it that sense of place again. So we feel this is going to pass. It's a complementary form of dialoguing with a really beautiful architecture that you could never even rebuild today in any way whatsoever. So this view from the land side has these pockets of modern intervention, namely the tide clock elevator tower, which the lights go up and down as the tide goes up and down. A big portico that is facing west, because the historic portico is too noisy to hang out there because the FDR Drive is zooming by, so we had to make a quiet space, and that's that darker green in-between area there. And the front door, which is at the ground floor, brings you up to this amazing waiting room on the second floor, where you can have, and again, you have like 9,000 square feet, so you can have these huge parties up there. It'll be a civic space. We are playing the new and the old. There's a lot of historic fabric there, but the skylight, which was destroyed, we're putting in a kind of a modern glass lay light to sort of be a prismatic ability to gather and refract the sunlight inside the spaces, with some, little, very historic kind of front door, very discreet about how you gingerly deal with a landmark. The nesting glass bowls are really sheets of industrial glass that are slumped over headlight molds that we found in a headlight factory outside of Philadelphia, and that kind of ability to use glass to reflect and refract is the theme for the Westchester Reform Temple, which has this sort of lots of nuts and bolts to it, but you get this kind of beautiful moment in the sanctuary that we're proposing, and it's about to start construction. We looked at the Van Gogh's sort of way he would put pure color, allowing your eye to combine the color itself as the motif. The Star of David was the original 1950s synagogue, and sort of quickly consumed by programmatic elements over the years. And the moment where they've brought us into this project is where they have found that they've outgrown all their spaces and they need a new sanctuary, they need a new social hall. So we've got about 12,000 square feet to play with, entrances, and we're going to transform the old sanctuary into the classrooms, and then the new sanctuary, which is this brown square in the middle, which is sort of it's a sandwich of sanctuary and social hall, which you can open the two with these big sliding doors. So that element in yellow, orange is the focus of this investigation. How you get in and out becomes really critical, but the key here is really low budget. So we've got a lot of sheetrock out of necessity. We can't afford skylights, but we wanted the ceiling to be this dynamic element that played off of kind of an acoustical diagram, but at the same time gave it a texture and allowed the acoustical operations. And granted, we needed incredibly good sight lines when you've got 1,500 people showing up for High Holy Day. You've got to all be able to see the rabbi up at the bima. And that idea of having this special moment within the bima, so it became the kind of, you have to pick your battles. That became the focus of the architecture in a way. That big glass wall is sort of inspired by light reflecting off of water, rippling, and the ripples are all at different rhythms so that you get multiple reflections at any given time. So we've created a kind of industrial louver out of a curved glass that every curve is a little bit different, and you can position them differently to reflect either the sky, the garden, the grass, the trees, and would change at different times of year, winter, spring, summer, and this is the outside of that kind of glass wall as it blends into this sort of rhythm of masonry walls. Everything's numerologically based in very elaborate numbering going on in proportions. There's nothing more wonderful than to have this sort of play of sacred and profane as your program. Can't get into that. I just wanted to show you that specific sort of boiling moment within the glass. Our line of bowls and glasses themed around the Edward Durrell Stone 2 Columbus Circle project, which was just torn down to make way for the new Museum of Art and Design, the Brad Clofel project, which will be quite amazing. We all hope. But that's sort of using New York as a theme for some of our tabletop has gotten us into a lot of trouble because it sort of was very popular, and the people that run the Times Square bid, which is from 42nd to 47th Street at the intersection of 7th Avenue and Broadway, it's called the Bow Tie. They were in need of this, of kind of an epicenter and defining it. So they asked us to do something fun. We put in these little reflective mylar dots on the sidewalks in the streets as a kind of almost like a happening. And just, they've all kind of worn off over time, but it was really cool to see all the different lights bouncing off from all of the myriad colors that you find there. That exercise sort of led to a master planning of how to create a defined civic space within the bow tie itself. So here we are trying to glamorize the intersections, because this is a place for people, and we wanted cars to feel like the guests within Times Square. But Times Square there's no square there. There's no public space. So what we've tried to do is widen the sidewalks and create an island that you can also cruise through in this bow tie area. So what we found is as people move through here, all of the visitors are on the sidewalks, sort of watching the shows and shopping, and it's the residents and the people that work in there that go zooming up and down the islands, because that's sort of the hustle and bustle of New York. So here's the artifact of what's there. We're trying to create ways to widen these islands. You can see right now they go from 0 to 3 or 4 feet wide, and our intent is to actually make them a lot wider by taking over parts of the street with a flexible lane that we can put these temporary bollards up, so you can have your traffic and then you can put up the bollards and reduce the traffic. We're also trying different ways to use these dots in a denser way to create a kind of a wave, or to find the epicenter of the bow tie, so that heightened pedestrian experience is felt within the streetscape itself. So we're looking at different asphalts and granites and different kinds of pieces that we can put in the streets and sidewalks to do that. We're also, this is just putting Broadway Boogie Woogie down as a kind of a super scale version, just for fun, to see what would happen. And also we played around with the Campidoglio and that kind of collage. And it's amazing how you can create a very kind of staid area when you drop the Renaissance plan that Michelangelo derived for Rome. We also are trying a kind of random set of lines of different widths and sizes to sort of talk about the randomness of Times Square and the energy that's there. So sort of befuddling. Where's the crosswalk? I'm not sure. Do I go out into traffic? Sort of exacerbating the idea of the excitement of the happening moment. The ottoman and an armchair, which are actually on a glide, so they slide up and down in that traditional glider that sat on everybody's porch in the 50s. It's sort of the theme for the New York Public Library's branch in Soho that just opened up this fall. And it's 15,000 square feet, largely underground. So there's 2,000 square feet at the sidewalk level, and then you dive down into the cellar and the subcellar. And our whole proposition was how to bring natural light through the kind of circulation machine, which was also became the footprint for the air handler and the ductwork. So we were coupling up natural light, circulation, and air in this kind of ribbon that wanders through the three-story, largely underground Piranesian experience. This is the outside that sits between Broadway, Lafayette and Mulberry Street. It's called the Mulberry Branch Library. And this is a little alley called Crosby Street. And so we've demapped Crosby Street. The sidewalks are so narrow that we couldn't put in an ADA ramp and have a sidewalk at the same time, so we basically lifted up the whole sidewalk to kind of create a bridge to get into the library, because that ground floor of 2,000 square feet is 2.5 feet above the sidewalk, the normal street level. But that bridge allowed a fresh air intake opportunity to bring the air down below, and then the canopy above became the sort of the exhale version of the mechanical system. So, which also doubled up the signage and a rain screen and canopy. So this is kind of how it looks. The stair goes down into the subterranean levels, but it's not a continuous stair. It kind of wanders around. So when you look down, it's sort of this feeling, how do I get there? You have to kind of wander around a little bit to get there. We recycled a lot of the original cast iron and oak beams and wherever we possibly could, and then putting in our new materials with steel and perforated panels and oak floors, and expose as much of the brick as we could to kind of play off the new and the old. And now you can see that in the ceiling it's that green ribbon, which is the mechanical system painted with this kind of metallic green paint that hovers over the stair as you go downstairs, but because of the metallic paint, it also bounces as much light down into those underground spaces. This is now, you're in the second level below grade, where the children's reading room is, and you descend down via sort of a circuitous stair. This is the children's reading room, kind of the sidewalk vault outside those windows. It's not natural light, it's just because we couldn't afford to put in gratings in the sidewalk, so we just put in these fluorescent lamps out there to sort of create a kind of Harry Potter-esque feeling of this dungeon for the kids. Very low ceiling, and then this is the young adults area. They're not teenagers; they're young adults, and of which we were all formerly young adults. So you know that you want to have this sort of this ability of all these chairs are on wheels, so this is a very kind of formal photo stage thing, and we brought all our kids to be in here. But basically, in operation, all the chairs are kind of piled up on top of each other, and everybody's lying on top of each other, and they're all got their iPods on. It's really kind of cool for them. And this is what was the boiler room is now the main reading room, which is in the third level below the sidewalk, and it's also doubles up as a kind of assembly hall. And and you can still see the green ribbon in the ceiling in its sort of final resting place in this wonderful double height reading room with little windows from up above to look down, so you kind of can wander in there. The two-way tables and sort of became for me the symbol for the Studio Museum in Harlem that Mark referenced. The Studio Museum in Harlem is city-funded, no money, and competing against the Guggenheim, the Metropolitan, the Whitney. So we said, okay, what are the iconic moments within the architecture of museums in New York? The Guggenheim's got its drum, it's got that tremendous kind of insular quality, city at arm's length. The Metropolitan Museum has this amazing stair outside as the signature moment, and that becomes that kind of rise to pay homage to the classical architecture and the wonderful collections, but it's very much kind of an isolating moment, as well as the bridge into the Whitney, the Breuer, wonderful Breuer building, but you have to cross a moat to get to the art. So he's making you work to get to the art. We didn't have any money to make a signature moment that you would remember after you left the museum. So we sort of said, well, what do we have? What can we just find that we don't have to pay for? Well, it's this slot of space, urban renewal, left over, 25-foot wide by 200-foot long space right next door to the museum. So we had the city work a deal to give that slot of space to the museum, and that became the signature moment in a way, by putting the front door of the museum and its sort of salient feature, sculpture garden, and main stair, all occupying that slot of space. So you have to kind of encounter that slot when you first, in order to walk in the museum, and then you have to re-engage that slot as you wander through, because that inside that glass cube is the stair that goes down below grade into their new auditorium, cafe, and permanent collection galleries. And the difference here is that we wanted to highlight this as an institution. 125th Street is the craziest commercial epicenter you've ever seen, but all the stores pull their steel shutters down at 7 o'clock at night, and it's a darkened street. So we said, we're going to, for very little money, using this regular industrial glass, we're going to create a facade that will glow all night long, and that kind of offset of dark to light will give them this sort of everlasting iconic presence along 125th Street. So you can see in this section, at grade you've got the sculpture garden, below grade you've got the cafe, the permanent collection gallery, auditorium, with these signature kind of cones that stick up inside of that sculpture courtyard. And those cones, one's inverted, one's glass, one's masonry, those cones also house the mechanical system that bring all of that air down into the below grade spaces. So it's sort of making an opportunity out of a kind of a formal element. So you can see the stair diving down from the sidewalk alongside the glass cone into the permanent collection space, and the sculpture garden, when they've got their parties in the summertime, becomes this great gathering moment. So from quiet to noisy is both sort of an architectural as well as a kind of a sense of vibrancy. You appreciate the quietness, but you also want to feel the density of people. So you want to, that tightness is actually working well for us. The candlesticks that you can arrange in any which way you want on your dining room table become the symbol for the Stephen Gaynor School Ballet Hispanico, which is a 10-story building on 90th Street between Amsterdam and Columbus. And the stair is that kind of recombining moment. They lived in a townhouse, with the townhouse stair was the gathering place for all of the students. It was when they had 70 students in the Gaynor School, they're now 150. It's a special school for kids with special learning disabilities. So we took the stair and we said, okay, the 5-story stair really works. We want to keep it 5 stories, even within a 10-story context. So we'll put 2 5-story stairs together and we'll overlap them in the most public moment, which is where the cafeteria and the library and the science rooms are, and then the classrooms for the young kids are down below, and for the older kids they're up above. And that sort of stair became the theme for that kind of collision of people and teachers, and all the learning that happens in the classroom is sort of reinforced when you walk around between classes and engage with your friends and your teachers. We also worked very hard because the Ballet Hispanico is up on the top 3 floors, and the gym is in the basement. We used the concrete structure to create huge column-free dance spaces on the top 3 floors, and then also a big long span down at the bottom that needed some transfer beams to take that long span in the basement for the basketball court. So we wound the stair around these transfer beams. We also looked at panelizing the facade with brick put on these panels as tiles in a big factory in Long Island. They ship the panels in place and then they pop the windows on. So the stair and panelized thing becomes the theme that weaves its way through the building, Here are the finishes, again reference the panelization in the way the oak is floating inside of a slate floor, for example. And then you can see the haunches of the concrete in the background by that stair. So the stair engages the concrete haunch as you go up, and then continues to reference that. It's a 7-story atrium. The building code gave us a variance on this because of the structural system in concrete and all the fire codes that we were able to ramp up with. But basically the stair kind of winds its way through in a very open, direct way. And the concrete is also exposed in the library with these big public moments. The terror of the student facing the principal in this, but they love it. It's absolutely, the kids respond highly to the material and changes and the colors and finishes, all very simple and no nonsense in every way possible. So you can see the concrete engages the windows and little private study areas where we found opportunities for little bay windows, and you can see the long span up on the top 3 floors for the Ballet Hispanico, still referencing the concrete beams. Big heights, 60-foot high ceilings. You have to be able to throw somebody up in the air, and they can't hit any fixtures as they rise. The bay windows on the facade encountering a panelized copper that will age over time along with the stained concrete that's already going. So it's, this is a living organism of a building that's going to change color over time. And we kind of supported that, and the school supported that the building will look very different 50 years from now than the way it looks today, but that's fine. It's rugged and simple, like the tables. The martini glass and shaker, sort of fitting for one of our more glamorous projects that never got beyond schematic design. It's a 50-story tower down by the South Street Seaport, sort of the end of the long row of buildings before you hit the landmark area. So it's the bookend right next to where the Calatrava building was proposed. That won't happen either. Our project got bought out by another developer. They flip projects, and as the value gets enhanced over time. But we said, okay, this is a really tremendously narrow site. It's 45 feet wide. It's 120 feet long. So how can we celebrate this narrowness? And we put the hotel program at the bottom. This big, huge, sort of the living room of New York is this big box of a hotel with the tower rising. This is the water side. The hotel's on the sort of land side. So the water side has this sort of very direct knife blade-like edge, and sort of the play of the base. Towers have a base, a shaft, and a top. So we wanted to play off that in many ways with that design. The chip and dip is a favorite party scene for the Super Bowl and Super Tuesday. So we wanted that to reference the work in Wall Street. This work is largely based on security measures after 9/11. The number one terrorist target in New York is the New York Stock Exchange. They closed down the area and city planning. The boiling point became that all of the financial institutions said, we're going to leave. We're going to go to Midtown. We're going to go to Jersey City because this is inhospitable. You've created a militaristic zone by closing off all the streets with pickup trucks full of sand in the back and big M16s out on display. So this is sort of the program for the New York Stock Exchange as NYPD gave it to us. This is what we have to design for. It's lots of fun. So we have to stop a 15-ton payload going at 55 miles an hour on a dime, right? You can't not even give 6 inches to meet the rating. So this is the kind of militaristic scene that we were asked to work with. This is the police put down these jersey barriers and barricades, funneling people through here. Here's the pickup trucks full of sand and planters, and just, in the densest part of the New York City, how do you work around that? So we said, let's take sculptural elements and put those in the street in a kind of a variegated way, so that the defensive measures become part of our whole streetscape effort. And so that is really sort of the played itself out along here. The retractable bollards allow emergency vehicles to go through, and basically it's the utilities below the streets that prevent us from putting in these big retractable clamshell devices that you normally see. So we had to be very clever about where we could put in some retractable elements. We tried to. Where we can't, we had to deal with it on the surface of the sidewalk. So you can see the utilities that are, every utility in the world is underneath these sidewalks. And the analysis that we did from the Jersey barrier to the planter to the sculptural barrier became the theme. And it's really, we explored hundreds of these shapes, and we found one shape in particular that worked because you could spin it around and it looked like multiple shapes depending on its relationship to the one next to it. And then we took the mirror version of that and we made these two out of bronze. And they became the hallmark for the financial district. And they're lovable and playful and something that everybody is now enjoying. We're also beginning to operate with movable furniture and benches to create a kind of varied streetscape, and softening up the barrier around the stock exchange itself, because we've taken the cars from, we've screened the cars from coming through here. We use the elements of the historic relics of the wall of Wall Street and the canal that used to run up, called Broad Street, when it was New Amsterdam, and those became themes for what we're doing now, which is bringing a big fountain up Broad Street and reenacting the wall with wood tiles that we're inlaying inside of the cobblestone street. The two-way table is a theme for this streetscape work that we're doing at Battery Park City. And this is right next to the stock exchange, but it's largely a suburban context instead of an urban. Here you have all sorts of things to play with in below grade. So we're creating soft berms and concrete walls that serve as benches to create a kind of invisible security corridor around the financial institutions within Battery Park City. So they're meant to go away, but they're also meant to tie the district together. The ferry drops people off, 60,000 people in the morning come through the ferry and go over to the World Trade Center area. So that VZ Street corridor becomes the theme that we wanted to play with the street element, which is an illuminated glass bench, and tied in with the other axis of having these green islands that were already existing within the master plan of Battery Park City. We wanted to occupy those islands with programmed spaces. So we put in a dog run, we put in a tree nursery, and we put in a kind of a ball field area. And one of them is also acting as a security device that guards the entrance to the financial district. So the glass bench in section, you can see here how does a glass bench become a security device? Well, there's a 4-foot concrete wall underneath the glass bench, and in front of that concrete wall is compressible concrete. And so when you've got your vehicle moving at 55 miles an hour, its tires will sink inside of that compressible concrete, which is covered up with cobblestones, and effectively turn that sunken wall into a 4-foot high barrier. And I'm not sure this is going to go, I had trouble with it earlier, but basically we found a compressible concrete material that's used at the end of runways to stop the planes from it didn't work, sorry about that, stop the planes from crashing beyond the runways when their brakes fail. And so we've modeled this compressible concrete down in Vicksburg, Mississippi, with a truck that we had to buy because the city wouldn't pay for it. It was out of their jurisdiction. So we had to buy the U-Haul truck, drive it down, put the payload on, working with the Army Corps of Engineers. And I'm really sorry that these are not working, but basically you know what's going to happen. It's going to sink inside of that compressible concrete surface area that we covered in AstroTurf and crash against the barrier. So these glass benches, which are now found down in front of the Battery Park City area, are their signature moment, and the glass blades that become the trellises in the islands that are the other axis become that signature moment, whether they're at the nursery, the dog run, or the guard device. So these are some of our drawings for those public spaces along the vertical axis. And we had a lot of fun trying to find an alternative to the typical black picket fence, and we found a stainless steel filter manufacturer in Wisconsin, a sort of a grain filter factory, and they made these at like $8 a linear foot as opposed to $120 a linear foot, so we could afford some nice things that way. That work led us to one of our favorite buildings as architects, because the 9/11 Memorial will open up on the west side of the building, the Pentagon, and the metro station is on the east side of the building. So all of a sudden, starting this summer, you're going to have hundreds of thousands of people visiting this memorial, and this parking lot and really ugly campus needed an upgrade. And despite the military as being our client, the Defense Department is actually entertaining some really interesting and innovative techniques to make a beautiful pedestrian corridor. This is what's there. It's about as unfriendly as you can possibly imagine. Again, dealing with the truck bomb possibility, and this is the metro station as it emerges out of the ground. We went back into Civil War drawings and engineering and found out that a lot of these battles were fought around defensive measures that were built with guys with their picks and shovels and whatever rocks and dirt and wood they could carry. It's now obviously softened over time, but everything is incredibly delineated according to sight lines and shooting lines and how to keep people from climbing up, and highly engineered elements that are defensive in nature. So we said, let's take that same kind of engineering and apply it to earthworks that we can use to keep truck bombs from crashing into the Pentagon with these offsets and things like that. So we set up the required sight lines that they need as the entrance into the Pentagon, from which they need to see everywhere, and so we bermed around those sight lines to create this variegated kind of landscape, using the typical flora that is often found in these memorialized battlefields, and bring those into the play around the Pentagon itself to sort of celebrate the publicness of this corridor. So this is a schematic proposal that is being marched through all of the, you can imagine, bureaucracy within the rings of the Pentagon. We're getting closer and closer to final approval, so this is several years out. The technology to paint MDF with a spray gun is if you try it, you'll find that nothing really wants to stick to MDF in any real way, and the bonding that you get will deteriorate very quickly. So as a surface, it's not an acceptable commercial technique. So we found a way to magnetize MDF and spray it so that there is no wasted paint, and it just adheres to the MDF with this wonderful surface for the truck tables. That kind of sort of charging this public space. This is a competition in Toronto where there's an existing wonderful city hall designed by I'll I'll tell you later when I think of his name. But it was an international competition won by this Danish architect. Fantastic, but it doesn't work. It's there's no there, and so we were one of the finalists in this competition to bring a green space within this sort of concrete 1960s landscape. So we've created a hill under which is the kind of programmed restaurant information area with an amphitheater outside, and the greenery winds its way around the base of the building, and sort of celebrates the need for the softening of that, but still being sympathetic to this really cool 60s historic space with lighting as the sort of the charger that brings people to those spaces. It's dark at 3:30 in the afternoon in 6 months out of the year in Toronto, and so how you pull people in and sort of magnetize the public space became that kind of the focal point for this bermed up area. We were derided by the Canadians by sort of saying, why, you think all we think about is bonfires and ice skating and sledding and stuff. So we didn't win the competition, but we got close. And we teamed up with Ken Smith on this effort here, creating a sort of variety of areas within this softened concrete landscape. And then the deck of the City Hall itself became the kind of the rivulets of water as expressed in different kinds of plantings. The candlesticks in glass was a wonderful idea, but a terrible product, and it never reached the market. As the candle burns down into the glass epicenter, the glass started to break. So we had these really beautiful, expensive prototypes that never got anywhere else. But they're beautiful. And that kind of idea of taking something that is almost going to fail, but trying anyway, is what won us this competition. This is the 1 acre park at 55 Water Street. It's right by the South Street Seaport, which is on the upper left. And it's a park that's 30 feet above street level in this iconic 1972 Emery Roth concrete building. It's the second largest office building in the country after the Sears building. They were given another 500,000 square feet on the top because they created this privately owned public space. Nobody ever went there. So Municipal Art Society said, let's do a competition. We teamed up with Ken Smith, won the competition, and we won largely because we said we want to make the adventure of the New York Harbor play itself out in this 1 acre park and create some drama where there is none. So we studied a variety of parks in New York City, Bryant Park for its wonderful ability to change its program, Rockefeller Center for its kind of civicness, the Brooklyn Promenade for its views, and Paley Park for its kind of respite and quiet beauty and elegance. So the park, the 1 acre park, has bordered on two sides by this behemoth of a concrete building, and by the FDR Drive and the East River on the other side. So what we said is we need to make the ascent up that 30-foot height a dramatic experience and reward you when you get to the top. So you can imagine as you go up this elevated hill, your reward is, and it's this ADA compliant and you go through all these sort of New York City, what used to be there in kind of the estuary flora. You arrive at the top and there's this terrific view of the East River, so you're looking over the FDR Drive. We took this photograph just by chance. The Robert Smithson Island, which was recreated by the New York Art Foundation, happened to be floating by pulled by a tugboat. So we just felt like, okay, the gods have aligned with us in this one moment in our lives. So there is a kind of a folly, which is the glass beacon of light that in the daytime it's a different combined acid etched glass, different surfaces at different planes. At nighttime, it's got this ability to change color because it's illuminated by all these LED fixtures, and it's this sort of element that's very captivating. You can see it from all over the New York Harbor, and yet gives you kind of a scaled destination place within the park itself. And getting up to the park, we sort of themed along the lines of Bernini's the Spanish Steps and that idea of making the steps and escalators fun and interesting. So different landings, different events along there to get you up to this area. And next to that bermed hill is a artificial turfed play area with an amphitheater wrapping around it that serves as summertime movie theater and well loved by the downtown community. This is our drawing. Not real. The idea of the architectural screen that can fold up and put away, and when it's out becomes the kind of it's such a distraction within the room. Even though you can see through it, you actually start to look at all of the different ways that the leather panels that are stretched on these stainless steel rods are combined and recombined in different ways. That's sort of a parallel to our thinking for the History Channel's vision for New York City in the year 2106, and they selected 10 architects to compete for this prize in New York City, 10 architects in Chicago, 10 architects in LA. So we were one of the 10, and so we started by saying, we want to talk about New York in a new way. We want to push the boundaries, and so here is a diagram of how you squeeze the scaled, how you squeeze Central Park into the East River, right? It gets tight, it expands, but that is Central Park in its 880-acre glory, squeezing between Brooklyn and Manhattan and under the bridges, changes your perception of the city as we know it today. That will happen 100 years from now, but only if we can change the way we obviously use our infrastructure. So starting with the 1 acre zero carbon fiber, the idyllic woodland, sustainable in its own, pristine way, paradise. If you took 1 acre of New York City and you said, okay, how can we let 1 acre of New York operate in exactly the same way, using the idea of light and water and combining, taking carbon dioxide and producing oxygen, we can all of a sudden start to study, like the tree within the forest, the buildings within the city. How can you isolate a building and make it, and supposing, right, that we can transform each and every building into its own self-operating kind of mechanism for energy and zero carbon footprint. Supposing you can do that per building or per block, then you can actually take on the 1 acre as an idea. So looking at the view of Manhattan and saying, if we took all of the streets and we made them green, because we'll have this terrific mass transportation system that we won't need to have cars anymore at all, so those become public spaces, and we take the waterfront, which is New York's greatest feature. It is why it is the greatest city in the world, because of its industrial and transportation and financial combining all those things. So take that waterfront and turn the waterfront parks into the bio-scrubbers that will take all of our waste and, once again take the waterfront, which was the financial, heart of the city, and transform it into a public space, like they're starting to do, like the Intrepid aircraft carrier, which is now going to be put back in its berth this summer. Take that and make our waterfront into a public space, but let that park serve as the industrial version of what in the 19th century were our factories. The park is going to become the industrial version of our lives, where we're going to use that as a way to transform our waste and recycle it back into action, oxygen and greenery. Excuse me. So here are the images of having solar walls on all the buildings, photovoltaic panels or fabric that allow the wind to weave the fabric, and the friction of the panels becomes the way that you produce energy. Supposing that happens throughout, we built these great models where you look down one end of the model and you see, you're inside the city looking down the corridor. You're looking at the fabric panels that produce energy. You're looking at all the infrastructure in the streets, and you turn then the model around, and actually, you get this play of perspective. This is the waterfront side with the industrial bioscrubbers underneath the parks, and we had a lot of fun with that. We won the technology prize, by the way. We didn't get first place. That went to shop, and they did a beautiful project. ARO, sorry, went to ARO. We're all interchangeable at some point. As a peer group, there's a lot of camaraderie that we can talk about later. The candles, the very primitive candlestick, that is something that you can put together in different ways, creating your own combined composition out of flat, turning into vertical. These are two flat pieces of steel that come together like, I don't know what you call that kind of slot of connection, but basically that was the inspiration for the last project you're going to see, which is Governor's Island. This is an idea that Adrian had about creating on the flatness of Governor's Island a vertical landscape that would become a mirror, if you will, of the verticality of Lower Manhattan. The idea of how to take this current flat piece of land, which is largely infill from the Lexington Avenue subway. The 172 acres, half of it is landfill, the other half is historic original island. How to create vertical space. So this is a rendering of what you'd see if this was the end result, where we take all the buildings down that are on the modern side and take the rubble, and from that rubble build hills that can get you up to the tops of where the buildings are in that whole Coast Guard area. They're the tallest buildings are about 105 feet high. So that's our goal, is to create these new hills out of the rubble through an engineered gabion and blanket system, and use these hills to sort of celebrate the verticality and create dramatic views of the New York Harbor. So the interlayered within that kind of discussion is also how many different kinds of biotopes can you create within the landfill side to recreate what was once here in pre-Columbian times, but not to a cartoon effect. But we want to sort of heighten that. So we want to have these moments of transition from real formalized flower bed gardens into meadows, into forests, and finally out onto the southern tip, which is the saltwater marsh. So you can see that kind of transition from the historic side to the sort of recreated island estuary side. You go from this sort of flamed flower beds of tulips, very dramatic, through the fields and meadows, down to the hills, and then finally to the saltwater marsh, and its wonderful opportunities for migratory birds that use the Hudson River as their compass when they go from North America to South America in the wintertime. The shades, the striped greenery, the sort of the dull green striped areas are slated development sites for future construction. So the program for our 40-acre park truly is, when you really read between the lines, it's, yes, we have all this great waterfront along the island itself, that all of the developers right now are hand-picking sites that they want to put their buildings on, but the city very cleverly said, well, wait a minute, when we build our park, we'll not only have great waterfront sites, but we'll have this secondary layer of great park sites once we put in the $250 million. And the developers, by their right, are saying they're waiting for the city to sort of put in that money and invest in the infrastructure, and then they'll come and start to take on pieces. But we're really carefully designing where those buildings can go and how they can work in a kind of balanced relationship to the park. So this view is an example of this 360-degree view that you get from the top of our proposed hill. It's an amazing view of the New York Harbor from the Statue of Liberty up to the Brooklyn Bridge. It's the only place where you can stand in the middle of the harbor and actually get that quality of here's New York, and it's an island for all 5 boroughs. So we're, having lots of fun, also playing with the circulation, having slow lanes and fast lanes. We have bicycles there for your use. We'll also have sledding hills with man-made snow, and we'll have different textures and surfaces that you're encouraged to run on, walk on, or bike on, so we can create these different kinds of speeds. This is the bicycle, the prototype in this rendered form. It's a wooden bicycle. It can float, but it's a signature bicycle, and you can't take it off the island because you can only get there by ferry. So 1,000 free bicycles. And if someone does want to throw one off the island, we can go back and get it as it floats away. So here are some of the kind of formal gardens that you can see. This is the boardwalk with its signature pavement pattern that will wrap around the whole island. We have these places for outdoor cafes and play areas, places for sculpture. We've got the saltwater marsh at the very tip, where you get that incredible spray in your face moment that we want to offset with this kind of quiet, tranquil place where you can wade in the water, and then of course the views and the wildlife and the public spaces. And here's where we're going to balance the different architectural teams. We'll have some buildings, George Scofidio will have some buildings, and West 8 largely has the signature park design to work with. Rogers Marvel is really also the team coordinator. And so that's the end of the show, and I'm happy to talk to you about your issues.
Take questions.
Yeah, I'd love to take questions, if any. Otherwise, we can all go home.
Yeah, Jonathan, it was great to see this array of projects. Can you say, since there are so many disciplines represented here, and I know that your office is interdisciplinary, can you say something about the impact of collaboration with landscape architects, industrial designers, and how that has an impact on your thinking as an architect?
Well, this is the hot topic right now, is the blurring of the professions. And we're working very hard to not necessarily compete with the landscape architects, because we're not landscape architects, but we really love engaging them in a discussion, and vice versa. I mean, we will let them, get into a dialogue about how we can change the architecture to reflect what's going on outside. But this blurring of the professions, I think, is really something that is elevating the discussion between which was, here's my turf, here's your building. We're now really working hard to make that a much more exciting dialogue. And I think by coming to the table and showing an interest in what landscape architects do is really, it's not a challenge for them. It's just they're honored with the sort of, let's collaborate on what the park's like, and for us it's a way of extending the scale of our practice from product design to buildings to outdoor spaces, and the idea that for architects, every inch counts for an architect. And landscape architects think in terms of yards and acres, and inches don't really matter. So, but to get into and detail a curb edge and to detail a park bench, but also to think big picture, how do people move through, and where are the congregating moments, and where are the circulating moments? We think along very structured lines like that, and I think the landscape architecture profession is changing dramatically. You've got Jim Corner and all of his work, and Fresh Kills and the High Line, taking on sort of industrial, underutilized spaces or brownfields, and the sort of the landscape architecture profession is now engaging the urban context in a very strong way, and I think that's also explaining why we're collaborating much more. And I think also just as a New Yorker, you need that. You need to exercise your eyes with a little distance, so it's not just here all the time. So it's important to get out there and do that. Yes.
I'd like to just add something, or basically add a question to that. How does the work on different scales change your, say, perception and the way you work with materials? Because there's a whole range of difference from the wooden bicycle to, landscaping aspect, recycling of entire structures to build hills and sustainability aspects. So how do you learn from other disciplines in terms of how you use material, in what scale you use material, how you can manufacture things? Is there a strong exchange between the disciplines? Or?
I think what's driving, historically, we were always interested in materials that didn't require paint. So we want the thing to be itself. And that's, it's very fashionable to have that rugged rawness and juxtapose one material against the other. And so where I think we are, when we talk to structural engineers, and we want the steel to be out there. And so how you keep the steel from being covered up in fireproofing it then becomes a plumbing dilemma, because you've got to sprinkler the hell out of it, or put tumescent paint on it, or use not use steel but structured concrete. One of the things that I find very exciting about the whole LEEDS movement is that it's redefined the manufacturing base and creating a lot of really great materials that didn't exist before. And it's also created that base within that 500-mile radius that your materials have to come from to become LEED certified. So it's exciting because you can actually go to the source now. You can go to the concrete plant, you can go to the steel yard, talk to the guys there, and that's a huge benefit, because then we can specify and afford this stuff, because we're not, if you just start to manipulate it and make it for form's sake, it's very expensive. But if you take the basic specs that they want to make it realize in its most efficient way, that becomes your program. In a way, like the I-beam, the most efficient, simple structure becomes the beauty of the material itself. And glass, I think, is being heralded as the material of the 21st century. We're seeing glass in all shapes and sizes, laminated, colored, structural. That's where there's a lot of work out there, and a lot of people are investing money, big money, in glass, in innovative glass envelopes and things. So we're seeing a big transformation in that area.
You were juxtaposing the images of the industrial design that truck was doing, and I was wondering if you could, that was just for fun, but I was wondering if you could elaborate on how the work that truck does is influenced by or influences the architectural work that you do?
Philosophically, we started out by saying, okay, how are the name truck comes from, you can have the chassis, and you can plug different things onto it, to pickup truck, garbage truck, cement truck, but it's still the truck chassis. The frame is the same. You're just plugging different program components onto it. So we wanted to go into industrial product design because we felt that here we spend so much time making the space, but then the stuff that fills up the space is it's out of just sort of random stuff floating in. So we said, so we started with surfaces and said, okay, the easiest thing is to put something on the wall. So a wall hanging system, and then let's invent something for the ceiling in terms of storage elements, or innovative ceiling mechanisms that could double up with other things. We always want this idea of doubling up, because that's how architects think. You constantly have to double up and have things multitask within a building. And then the last thing was the floor, put something on the floor, what's the most simple, chairs. So that's where the idea of the flat pack, I mean, and I'm giving you a little bit of the thought process because that's how we just didn't arrive at it. It sort of came out of an architectural way of, buildings are made out of components, let's make the chairs out of components, and flat pack because it's easy to ship and walk out of the store with it in a bag. And then that kind of led to the different plies. In order to make something flat, you can layer different materials onto it, materials that we use all the time in an innovative way. So creating a laminated aluminum, really lightweight but very strong kind of system, which is that table section that I showed you. So that kind of led to, in the end, we got a contract with a big international company called Mikasa. They really wanted stuff that was a little more decorative, and that's why we dipped into interesting shapes that could complement each other, like the cup on the tray or the candlesticks. And then we started applying architectural moments of our favorite buildings. So we have a Brooklyn Bridge pattern, we have a park, we have a Lever House pattern, we have that two Columbus Circle pattern. So because you have to kind of foray to take on the world of the tabletop. You have to foray into decorative, because that's what people want in the end. People want something that's good looking, and that doesn't always mean innovative. Right? Yes.
Could you say something about how your firm is structured, and what I mean by that is I'm wondering whether each of you work through all of those scales, from industrial design to urban planning. Do you hire industrial designers to work with you, or?
We have 3 industrial designers, an engineer, 2 landscape architects, 2 urban designers, a kind of a crazy sort of mill, shop guy who can make anything. And everybody, we have a big open office, so there's no walls, no partner's desk, it's just, so everybody's floating around, different teams, and we make a point of having everybody work on 2 or 3 projects at any given time, so you're always working with different people at different scales, different scheduled projects, different phases, so it's really, and very heavily, take it and run with it, and what can you come up with attitude within the teams themselves.
How many people total?
55, roughly 55 people.
That's great. That's work.
It's fun.
Okay, thank